So today, Evelyn asked if I would cover aspects of the gradient tool. That's covered in a future lesson, but I can talk about some of it now. So to use gradients, there is a gradient panel that I should probably pull off. You can always pull these tabs off and you can drag them back in if you want. So I'm just going to pull it off. So we have the gradient. Also probably want the swatches panel. That might help me too, because I can add each of these gradients as a swatch. So just for the time being, I can do that. And over to the left, we have the gradient tool. Okay. And we'll probably need to look at our properties panel as well when I do that. Now, there are some default gradients that you can see inside our swatch panel. So I'll start with those and I'll show you how to work with those and manipulate them and create your own. There are also libraries of gradients that you can make use of. So to use a gradient, you just need to first create a shape. So I'm going to start with a rectangle. And I'm also going to create an ellipse, like so. Right now we have a white fill. And what I'm going to do is make sure that the fill is selected in the foreground. And I'm going to select one of the gradients. There we go. So as I select the gradient to fill it, by default, it is a linear gradient. And there are technically three kinds of gradients now. There's the linear. We look up here. There is a radial. And there is a freeform gradient, which is new. And this one gets fairly complicated, and I'll touch on it, but I really want to focus on these two. This one I will reserve for the lesson when we cover it. We'll cover it. Now, what we can do with this is that you can always switch it. For example, it's linear right now, but what if I want it to be a radial gradient? While it's selected, I just select that, and it changes it for that shape. Okay, so linear, radial. At the same time, it will, at the bottom, it tells me what colors are in that gradient. So starting from left, I have the yellow, and ending at right, I have a red. If I want to edit a color, I can do so. And so I can either do that from the gradient panel, and we can click up here. And if I were to click on the gradient, I could probably change it from there. But this is probably the easiest way to do that. So to add a color, all I have to do is move right underneath the color bar here. You'll see a little plus sign, and I just click. And what that does is that it creates a color that's between these two colors. If I want to change that color, for example, if I double click, let's click on it, I can use CMYK callouts. I can also, if I have a color inside my color panel, I can use that. So maybe I want to add a green to that. I've just added a green. Okay. If you want to remove the color, then you can click and drag and pull it off. The little diamonds at the top determine the distribution of the colors between these two. Right now, it's a little bit skewed towards the left, but if I want the lighter color to be the dominant color down here, I can move that across like so. Or if I want them midway, I can choose that as well. I can also move the distribution of the colors just by shifting the colors across like so. That's one way of doing it. This is kind of the old way of distributing colors. There's another tool that's really very nice, that if I select the gradient tool, you'll notice that this little widget pops up, which really mirrors what we have here. And when I select this tool, notice that I can go ahead and I can rotate it. like so. So now the gradient does, rather than goes from left to right, or right to left, goes at a diagonal. Okay. I can click on this end and I can move it. So notice as I move it down, it's predominantly the red. If I move it in between, okay. If I move back over, I can select it. So that's the linear gradient. If I switch to the what is it?
Sorry to interrupt, Professor. The other interpreter, Bernice, was kicked out of Zoom. Would you mind spotlighting her back to a panelist?
Oh, yeah. Hold on. Let me pause just a second. I'm going to pause recording. Okie doke. There were a couple of questions, I guess. So let me look at and these. Let me see. I'm trying to find the space. When I'm sharing, I don't see everything right. Okay. Oh, there it is. Question and answer. Oh, okay. Bernice. Okay, got it. Sorry. Back in. Okay. Let me bring up chat. Oh, okay. It had to do with spotlighting. Never mind. Well, I've got some dead space in here. That's okay. So anyway, I am recording. Yeah, I am recording. So also notice that we can control the radial gradient now a little bit differently. That if I click like so, notice that I can change the gradient like that. And I can also move the center of the gradient. If I click, hold on here. There we go. See how I can move that around? And that's the same over here. If I go ahead now and I select a different shape. And I go ahead and let's add, I'll add the same gradient. Again, it starts off as a linear gradient. If I select the gradient tool, I get this little widget. I can click on it and I can, move it over like so. But notice that the range of the gradient changes within that shape as I do that. I can come back here and I can stretch that inward, or I can stretch this outward depending on how you want to distribute the colors. And again, if I move over the edge or the corner, I can click and drag to rotate and change the direction of the gradient. So instead of horizontal, I can make it vertical, or I can make it at any angle I want. And then again, I can go back in and I can redistribute the colors. I can stretch them out. So move this down to here, and let's stretch that out. Okay. And again, if you want to add a color, I'll do that again. I'll go ahead and I'll click right here. Oh, come on. There you go. So there's the added color. Now, if I double click on it, it brings up, because this is the last one that I used, it used the swatch panel. But if I want to put in a specific color from CMYK, I can do that here. So if I want that to be predominantly cyan or greenish color, I can do that. So I can either change it from here, or I can change it from this little widget right here. Does that help you out, Adeline, as a starting point? The other one is, let me show you the different one briefly, which is this one, which is the Freeform. And to use this one, it starts off with these little points. Okay. So now if I click in here, see how I can add different colors in here? And I can also, these are points, but, and it works similar to another tool that we have, which is the gradient mesh tool. And you can click on each one of these and you can assign a color. So if you want to add little blotches of color, this is how you would do that, okay? So I'll come back here and I'll click on one of these, and then this controls the distance that color affects. So let's select this one, and again, I'll double click on there and I'll pick a different color. So I'm getting all these different, and if you want to get rid of colors, you just select it and delete. Select that little splotch and delete, and you can move them around to effect. So it's like adding little droplets of watercolor into your shape. And this can be really kind of cool. This can be very nice. This one, on the other hand, let's do it from here. And I'm going to switch to this one. Let's select the shape. That would be helpful. If I selected the shape and I use this one. Okay, and I'm going to use lines instead. Now if I click in here, okay, now I've created a line within this. And for each one of these, I can select a different color. Or I can select the same color if I want. Actually, I forgot what color I selected, so let's do that. And look at how, without actually using all of them, how I'm controlling the gradient that I'm leaving it. And I can move, I can select the color. You can click on here and you can delete the color. I can take this one right here. I'm going to delete that one. There you go. And there are some nice demonstrations that we have on this tool, because this one can, to control the gradients in here, are used extensively for creating a little bit more realistic or more complex illustrations. So does that help, Adeline? Does that help you? Yeah? No? Question? Oh, okay. Got it. Good. One other thing. Let me go ahead and answer and done. Is that if you want to add this gradient to your swatch panel, once you have created the gradient, all you have to do is down here in the swatch panel, let me go ahead and see. Well, let me do that. Not for this type of gradient, but for the other gradients. Let me go back and just switch this to linear. So this is, I'm going to go back and select this one again and add a color again, just to make it different. We'll go ahead and move down here and add a new color, double click. And again, I'm going to add a green to it just to make it different. Now, if I like this color, what I can do is I can come down here and you'll notice in the swatch panel, I can go ahead and I can add a new swatch. And I can name it, or I can use the CMYK color callouts for this. So if I want it, you know, Hertz gradient, I can just type that in. And add it, and there it is. It's been added to my color panel. Okay. So now I can come back and select this one. No, wrong one. Where is it? Is that one? No. Well, where did it add line? I know it added it. Let me go back again. Let's select this one. And let's see where it put it. I got to check here very carefully. There it is, right there. So now if I select this one and I want to duplicate it, I So that's how you add the gradients to your swatches. For the more complicated freeform gradient, you cannot add them to swatches. Okay. So that's those are a brief introduction to gradients. So I'm going to go back to lesson 5. And we're going to continue with that. I'm going to go ahead and close this. I'm going to close this. And this is the end result. This is just transforming objects in different ways of transforming shapes and things that you should be aware of. And it also covers rulers. It covers artboards and a variety of tools. There's a really nifty one over here that's underneath the free transform called Puppet Warp, which is really kind of neat. That's how we get the little man here to bend. Okay. So we have 3 artboards here. And when we go to our start file, like so, I'm going to zoom out a little bit so I can see this a little bit better. This up. Okie doke. So we have all of the artwork here that lies outside of this single artboard, but I want to add new artboards because this is going to be a brochure. This will be the cover, this will be the inside, and this will be the back. Okay. But right now, you can see that we only have 1 artboard, and if you're not sure about how many artboards you have, if you want, if you click on this little panel right here, these are your artboard panels. You can see that we only have 1 artboard. Well, our artwork will only print if it's contained within that artboard, the little white area. Anything that lies outside of it can be part of your file, but it will not print. So I want to actually add these elements. I mean, they're already a part of my file, but I want to be able to print them. So what I'm going to do is over to the left, I'm going to, this time I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use the artboard tool. And I'm going to go ahead and deselect it, deselect this one. And there's a variety of ways that you can add new artboards. I got to move this little panel up here. I can go ahead and I can click and drag like so. And I can create a brand new artboard. I can also, to control the size of it, I can use over here that we're working in points right now, or I can control the width and the height from here. So let's say, for example, I want the width to be 800 pixels wide. Whoa, I don't want it 8,000, I want it 800. There we go. Okay. And maybe I want the height to be, this can get very specific. I want it to be 850, for example, for right now. Okay. And I can move it up and I can align it like so. Now, if I want to duplicate that, exactly the same size, all I have to do with this artboard selected is I can select this little button at the top where it says new artboard, and it will automatically create a duplicate of the one that was selected. To rearrange them, you just simply select the artboard you want and move it to a new location. If you want to align them, you can do that too. So I can hold down the Shift key and I can select all 3 of these artboards. And I can look at artboard options here. It will allow me to name them. It will allow me to do a whole variety of things, these that we'll come back to in a minute. So I'll cancel that. And I can use the align tool. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to, I want to align them along the center. Okay, let's see. That's what I have. It's not working for me. Oh, sorry. Well, you know what? I've never had to do this. So. Wants me to select a key object. I don't know why. Well, I'm going to overlook it because it's fine the way it is. It really is. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. It's never been that critical for me to have to align it. If I want to change the bottom of this artboard to match the others, I can do so. And I can resize them. So to do that, you'll notice that I have rulers visible. If you don't have rulers, then you can't bring up guidelines. And it's Command or Control R to bring up rulers. If you want to change the measurement of the rulers, then you go up to the Illustrator panel, you go to Preferences, and you select Units. Now, right now it says it's in inches, but it's not labeled in inches. So why is that? Well, there's two ways of changing it. And that's where it can be confusing, and then you can forget that. If I go to File, and I go to Document Setup, this would be another place to change it. And you'll notice here, the units are in pixels for this particular document. If I want it instead to be in inches, then I can change that. And now you'll notice that the measurement is in inches. Also notice that where the ruler begins is at the first artboard. It starts right here. The 0 is right at this edge, and the 0 is at the top here. So what I can do is I can, if I want to bring out guidelines, I can click on the ruler and drag down like so until it matches. Rulers are separate elements that, or guides are separate elements that can be locked. My recommendation is when I use guidelines, I put them on their own layer, and then when I'm done using the guidelines, I will lock that layer so I don't accidentally move them and they don't interrupt or affect the other objects that I'm working on at the time. So I'm going to go back to, this is probably doing this a little bit awkward. I'm going to go back down here and deselect. And I'm going to move this one down a little bit, and so that it matches. And I'm going to select this artboard, and I'm going to move it up so that it matches the others. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. There we go. Select it, move it up until it snaps to the guideline. Okay. Now I can come back now, and I can take this object and I can move it up. And you'll notice that we need to change the size of it a little bit. No, this actually works pretty nicely. And we'll take this object that's already been grouped together and we'll move it up until it fits this artboard. And so now all of these separate elements will print because they each have their own artboard. We can also rename them and we can reorder them. That if I select artboard 1, okay, that's the first one that we selected. You can rearrange them by moving them up and down just like layers. And we can also rename them. You can rename them from here, or I can, when I have the artboard selected down here, I can look at artboard options, and with this one selected, I can select inside. Maybe this is the inside of my document. So I'll go ahead and I'll select that, and you can see that it's named inside. Maybe I want that to be the second artboard. Then if I click on this one, I want this one actually to be the third one, and I want this one to be the top. Okay, so I'll double click on this one and I'll rename it from here. And I want this to be cover. And I want this one to be back. So that's the back. You can name them from here. it really, I rarely, unless things get really complicated, I rarely name these. But it really, you know, it's up to you how you want to work. So now I have those arranged. Now we're going to change a few other things. So we have rulers. Oh, another thing regarding rulers. Let me get out of artboards here. As I said, I switched this to inches. And we can see now that the origin, or the starting point of our rulers are kind of messed up. Well, it depends on where you want it to begin. But if you look in the upper left-hand corner, there's a little crosshair here. And if I want the origin of my rulers to be this top left-hand corner, or the bottom left-hand corner, or maybe I want it to be the center of this document, I can do that. And what you do is you click in this corner and you drag, and you notice the little crosshairs. And when I move over the top left corner and I release, notice that the origin of my ruler now is 0, 0 is this top left-hand corner. And you can change that at will. It's up to you. Okay, so that's rulers. Changing the, I'm going to change it back to pixels. So I'll go back to File. I'm going to go back to Document Setup, and I'm going to change it from inches back to pixels. Normally with printed documents, you measure in inches. For the web, you measure in pixels. So I'm not quite sure why they're measuring in pixels. Okay. One of the next things that they want us to cover here, I showed you how to work with rulers, how to bring, if you want to bring a vertical guide out, you just simply click and drag from over here. If I want one right in the center, see how I have a vertical guide. You can also lock guides. So once this is locked down, I can come back under View, and I can go to Guides, and I can say that I want to lock them. Now I can't inadvertently move them. If you do want to move them, then you have to go back to View, and you go back to Guides, and you have to say unlock them. Okay. You can also hide guides. They aren't deleted, they're just simply temporarily hidden. That's not a bad idea either. Okay. Scaling objects. So one of the first things that they want us to do is they want to scale this little guy right here. And this can be a tricky thing. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit and show you what happens. I can scale it just by moving over, selecting it and viewing the bounding box. Now this bounding box can be hidden. And if you want it hidden, if it's getting in the way of your illustration or your editing, you can go to View and you can say bounding box. It's here somewhere, hide bounding box. So that goes away. It's still edited, but I like seeing the bounding box more often than not. So I'm going to go back to View. And where it says, I'm going to say show bounding box. So that's there. So to scale it, I can, on the fly, I can do it a couple of different ways. I can hold down the Shift key and drag from a corner. And when I do that, okay, right now it's working pretty nicely. But what I need to do is under this group, notice that I have scale, strokes, and effects checked. If that is not Let me leave it. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to undo the size of that. Now, when that's unchecked, watch what happens when I scale this. So let me zoom back out, select it. And when that's unchecked, and I hold down the Shift key, and I drag down, hold on. No, it's still, there we go. Let me make sure that that's unchecked. Okay, so when that is unchecked, and I scale this, notice that the width of the strokes and the fills remain the same size, and that can be a problem. And when I scale like so, notice how the arms get really fat because they were just simply strokes and they remain the same width. I want them to scale the width of the strokes with the same with the object as its scale. So I need to undo, and I need to then bring out this little flyout window here and say scale strokes. So I can go ahead and go back here now and hold down the Shift key and scale it. And it looks just fine because now the strokes are scaled with the rest of that. If I undo that, another way to do that is that if I want to scale it from the center, hold down the Shift key and the Option key and click and drag and see how it scales from the center. If you want it to be a specific percentage of the original size, then you might want to use the scale tool. And that is right here. So this can be used a couple of different ways. If I double click on it with the object selected, it brings up the scale tool. Do you want uniform or non-uniform scaling? Do I want to scale the strokes? Yes, I do. Do I want it 100%? No, because 100% is the same size. Do I want it 50%? Maybe, but if I turn on preview, notice how it gives me a preview of the size that I want. So that could be another way to scale it. Okay, and click OK. So I undo that. Another way to do that is a little bit different. That if I want to scale it from, right now it's scaling it from the center, and you'll notice any number of places over here to the right in the transform, at the top in the transform, we have this little 9, it's very small on my screen here, and I can't zoom in to make it larger. It's 9 little, they look like 9 little anchor points. They determine on any object the point at which it will be scaled or rotated or any of that sort of thing. It's the action center really is kind of, right now it's the center. But what if I wanted to scale it about the left side? Okay, now if I select it, let's do the corner, yeah, the left side. So now if I go ahead and I scale it, watch what happens. I hold down the Shift key. Notice how it's scaling from the left. And even if I do it from the center, it should be along the left side. Maybe it's not. Okay. Be careful when you're resizing your objects because I can really make him into a little fat guy here, or a wide, broad person. So that's why I emphasize holding down the Shift key, because that will constrain the proportions. I can also use the scale tool by clicking on a particular corner. That if I want to scale it from this point right here, and I hold down the Option key and click, it will scale it from that point. So again, if I select 50%, and I scale effects and I click OK, notice that it scaled it from that point. If I also use the scale tool, and let's say I want to scale it from over here, this little point right here is the point about which it will scale. And now on a second step, as I click and I move it diagonally, it's really kind of very hard to control when I do that, but it's scaling it from this point over here. So it's kind of rare that you want to put a point over there, but you could do that. The modification. So I'm going to go ahead and just double click on it. And I'm going to do it from uniform, 50%, just for the heck of it, and scale it. Move out. And I'm going to move him up. And rotation and all the other modification tools pretty much are the same. These days, it's rare that you really need to use them that often because with the bounding box visible, I can, rotate it from here. And again, if you hold down the shift key as you rotate or you scale, it constricts the movement, like so. If I want to make it a little bit smaller, just do it like so. It's pretty straightforward, I think. Okay. We've got some other shapes to work with. So for example, to scale, I'm going to go ahead and before I scale the flower, there's something that I want to do with it. And right now you can see that this is a little circular shape. So let me go ahead and make a copy of it. So I'll hold down the Option or Alt key. And I'm going to shrink it down a little bit and we're going to make some duplicates of it. And I'm going to move this up here so that this looks like the finished product. And I'm going to scale it down just a little bit. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And again, to make a copy of it, I can hold down the Alt or Option key, click and drag, and if I want to constrain the movement, I hold down the Shift key, and I've made a copy of it. Now, if I want to duplicate that movement and that duplicate the object and the movement at the same time, hold down the Command D key, and that you can make as many of these as you want, which is pretty nice. Now, another tool that's really kind of cool is that if I select the, it will affect the flower here. And it's called, there's a number of effects that we can use. It's the pumpkin bloat tool. So because this is grouped together, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select the group selection tool. So I can select just this bright yellow circle here. Now with that selected under effects, if I go to distort and transform, and what I want is pucker and bloat. Watch what happens. A little dialog box pops up, and when I move this to the right, I get sort of a little flower shape, don't I? If I move it to the left, it pinches it, and I get more of kind of like a star shape. So this can be a nice, this I use from time to time. It's really kind of cool. So now I get my little, little flower shape without any muss or fuss. Okay. So I can deselect. I can zoom out. And I can go ahead and I can select this shape and do the same thing. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. And I'm going to move it into position. So that's the pucker and bloat over there. We have this little object as well that we want to affect. So I'm going to move it up here. And we've used some of these tools before. This is the, I call it the mirror tool, but that's not what they call it. Okay, so while this is selected, I can go ahead and underneath rotate. I can reflect, they call it the reflect tool. So again, if I hold down the Option key or double click on it, okay, it's going to give me a dialog box similar to what we had with the scale tool. I want a horizontal mirror. Okay, and it gives me the preview. But what I might want to do is I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of it. Whoops. So let me do this again. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to option click right on the bottom of this. And I want it to be horizontal, so I see the preview. And I want to make sure that I see and I have a copy of it. There we go. So now we have two. This is the approach that I prefer. Now I can go ahead and I can take and I can move this and offset it. And if I prefer, I can make a group of them so that they behave as a single object. Okay. So I'll select them both. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. See, you have to lock things sometimes. These are two shapes. So shift click to select them both and hit Command G to group them. Now I can make as many copies of those as I like. Okie doke. We have another nice tool, and this combines, again, rotate and duplicating. We want to make the windmill, the little paddles for our windmill. And we want to do it as efficiently as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and move this in a position like so. And if I want, this can be done a couple of different ways. I'm going to go ahead and just leave it vertical at the moment. But I want to rotate this and make a copy of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the rotate tool. So that should be, no, not there, it's over here. There we go, rotate. So I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. And you'll notice by default that action center is in the center of the object. Well, I want to hold down the Option key and click right here at the base of our windmill shape. And I want to rotate this 45 or 90 degrees. Okay. And if I do that, see how it gives me a preview of how it's going to be rotated. So what I want to do is not click OK, but I do want to make a copy of it. So now I have a duplicate of it based on it. And as I did with the other little shape, the flowers, I'm going to hit Command D. And before you know it, you have your windmill. And now I can go ahead and I can select all four of them by holding down the Shift key and clicking on each of these shapes. And then grouping them together, Command G to group. And then I can go over the corner and begin to rotate. And I can hold down the Shift key and it will constrain it to 45 degrees. So it's a very quick and efficient way of rotating and duplicating really accurately your shapes. Okay. A couple of other fun tools to use. For example, I want these shapes here to be the flags for days per year. I want them to be kind of wavy. So that's another tool that we have under Effects. I can go to Effect, and what I want to do is under Distort and Transform, I want this to be Twist. So now, if I do this, and let's do this 20 degrees and see what we get. And it starts to look a little wavy, doesn't it? So that's pretty cool. So that's what I want. I'm going to do that, and we'll select each one of these and do the same thing. I'm going to go to Effect, Distort and Transform, and select Twist. And again, make it 20 degrees, and I'll do the same thing. Effect. Effects, by the way, can are non-destructive. They can be undone or changed at any time. So I'll go ahead under Distort and Transform. And I want it to twist. And I'm just doing the same with each of these. effect, distort and transform, twist. And one more time. And then I want to show you a very useful tool that we don't cover for a while. It's the appearance panel that will allow you to go in and see how each of these shapes have been affected. Distort and transform, twist. There you go. So they've all been affected. Now, I want to see how each of these, what's affecting each of these tools. I can see to a certain degree, when I select the object, that I don't see anything over here under the effects panel. But if I close that and I select this and I go to window and I select that I want to bring up its appearance, let's go ahead and pull that out. And I scroll down a little, it gives me all the attributes of this particular shape. Notice that the effects twist has been applied. If I want to change the angle from 20 to another degree, I just click on it and it brings up that panel again, and I can change it from here. If I want to temporarily turn it off, I can do that from here. So it's really nice. You can see also that this particular shape has no stroke. If I want to add a stroke, I can add that from here. If I want to change the fill color, I can do that from here. So it's another way to control all of the shapes and to change them. We have the transform panel here. We have the transform options panel here. We have over to the left, we have our background or our fill color and our stroke, and our fill color and our stroke, and our fill color and stroke, and our fill color and our stroke. So there's any number of ways that is there a better way? No, it's whichever one is convenient or which one you feel most comfortable using. On a later date, in a different demonstration, I'll show you how you could add multiple strokes and multiple fills to the same object using the appearance panel. Really, really helpful, really helpful. I like having this up all the time. So I don't want that there. I'll pull that off, and I'm just going to close it for the time being. Another thing that they want us to do, we're going to use the free transform and the skew tool. How am I doing on time? Can you guys stick around for a little bit, or do you want me to finish this tomorrow? It's up to you. Finish it today? Okay. So I'm going to select, yeah? Okay.
Yes.
So I have one vote for today. So that means we're going to do it today. Okay. So I'll select this shape. And if we look at the finished version, you can see that the sign looks like it's in perspective, doesn't it? And that we have, right, rather than just flat shapes. Well, if I come back here, there's a couple of ways that you can do that. I'm going to go ahead and select the shape, and I'm going to use free transform right now. So free transform is found under here. And there's another little thing here that pops up. There are key commands for this, but you'll notice there is right in the middle, it's called a perspective distort. And now when I click on a corner and I drag, notice that it begins to look like it's in perspective, sort of, 1 point perspective. And now what I can also do is to make it, I can skew it to make it look like it is actually distorted at a separate angle, so that it truly looks like it's in a two-dimensional or 2-point perspective. So to do that under here, under here, I'm going to use, no, where is it? This one, there we go, the shear tool. So if I option click on the shear tool, whoops, no, where is it? There we go. If I double click on the shear tool, we can change the shear angle from here. So for example, if I select or just use this little widget here, see that? That's if we use horizontal. So I'm going to go back to 0. That's not how I want this to shear. If I want it vertical, again, I can change the angle from here. Whoa, that's, you know, a bit too much. But that's, you know, what we're getting at. I want this to be maybe 20 degrees. And now it truly looks like it's in a 2-point perspective. First, by using the free transform tool and using the 1-point perspective. And then by using the shear tool. And you can also use a specific angle from here as well. So I like the look that I'm getting from here. So I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to move this in place. So just move this over like so. Move it down a little bit. And let's do the same for the other one. So now I'll take this one and I'm going to use the free transform tool again, and I'm going to use the perspective tool. Only this time I want this side to be a little bit larger, like so. And then I'm going to use, again, the skew tool, like so. I'm going to go ahead and double click. And I don't want it to go in 20 degrees. I want it to go the opposite way, like so. Okay. Now I forget the exact angle that they want, but you know, close enough. That's too much. That's not enough. You get it. That looks pretty close. Okay. So I like that. I like the look of it. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. I don't need to copy it. I'll select it and I'll move it into position. Okay. Let's see how close I got to theirs. Yeah, close. Not quite the same, but you get the idea. So again, another way to transform your objects, take them from two-dimensional flat images and turn them into something that looks like they're in perspective. There is also a perspective tool that we will get to later that is a good way of putting things in perspective and transforming. The last thing that we want to do, I think it's, yeah, the last thing is we're going to take our little guy over here and we're going to use the puppet work. And I find this to be a really cool tool. This is really very nice. It's something that you might think of using for your illustrations from time to time. But we want this guy to look like he's kind of warping and woofing and, you know, blowing in the wind. Well, we could take each of the shapes and we can manipulate them individually. But instead, we have a tool over here that's hidden underneath the free transform. It's called Puppet Work. And now I can take this one, and you can see as I move that anchor point, it looks like his arm is bending. I can take this point here, and I can bend it. And it looks like he is kind of bending in the wind. When I'm done with it, you can go ahead and deselect. And there you have it. Very easily transform and modify the shapes. And we can always undo it. This one is this tool is less forgiving, meaning it's more destructive than the others. So typically what I would do before I transformed it like this, because if I wanted to get back to its original position, it would be much more difficult to do that. So I would make a copy of that object first and then distort it, transform it. And then if I needed to get back to my original, I had a copy of it at my disposal. So that's what I would do. So there you have it in a nutshell, all these different ways of transforming our objects. And some of them I did elegantly, and some of them I kind of goofed a little bit, but that's the way it goes. Okay. Any questions before I leave you today? And we can review some of these again tomorrow, and tomorrow being the last day of the class. If any of you want to share your masks that you want feedback, and maybe you need some help, I'm happy to do that. I would rather spend some time on that and work on the lessons. The lessons just, there's two ways of teaching or learning, I guess. And there is the prescriptive way of learning, which is what the lessons are. It's like following how to make a cake in a cookbook. You follow steps 1 through 6, and as we're doing that, we're learning new tools and you're learning how to use them. But there's also a descriptive way of learning, and it's how to take the tools that you have learned to use and put it to use in a creative manner. And that's really what the assignments do. They say, you've learned these tools, now how can you effectively put them together in a unique way and come up with something creative. Okie doke. Are we all good? Oh, Adeline, you want me to look at yours? Do you want me to share with everybody, or do you want me to turn off the recording? Adeline? Turn off recording. Oh, okay, that's fair enough. To see, I would be sharing it with you could be sharing it with the world on YouTube. So I'll go ahead here and I'm going to pause my recording.